I see live on Facebook.
Yes, welcome everyone. We are live. So my name is Josephine, and my husband Ferit today is the presenter, and he's right now already on Ile de la Cité. But before we get going, I just want to have a very quick reminder of how the tour is going to run. As you know, we are running these tours on a donation-based program, so we highly appreciate your support, and you can send a tip over at any time to Ferit on the link that I'm going to point out right now. And if you have any question during the tour, please write it in the chat on Facebook, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So yes, here we go. On to you, Ferit.
Hi there. I don't know if I'm popping up on the screen. Am I? Yes. Is it working?
Yes, it's working for me. So for those of you who are who have already tuned in, we have already 30 of you here. Let us know how is it working out for you in the chat.
So nice to meet you, anybody. My name is Ferit. It's not spelled like the animal. My parents chose that name. It means the unique. I'm going to be your tour guide today. We're going to take a short walk, about 45-50 minutes, along the Seine River on the historic island of the City Island. I'm going to just share a few stories. I would like not to go too much in depth today and do maybe a live tour of every element on its own afterwards. On this island, we have got Notre Dame, of course. We have got the Saint Chapel, the holy relics that were supposed to be kept in there. We have got Place Dauphine, Henry IV of history. Maybe you have heard of the Saint Bartholomew massacre. Maybe you have heard of the Knights Templar and the execution of the last head of the Knights Templar, Jacques de Molay. You know, maybe you know the legends of the 13th, Friday the 13th, right? All of these I'm going to talk about in further tours. But today, just few stories, one on each monuments maybe. And you can ask any questions at any time. Of course, we're here to serve you. So first thing we're going to start with, as many of you were asking for last time on the live, Notre Dame, still standing, right? I have heard some conspiracy theories, right? That it may collapse or things like that. Of course it may collapse, but we're making our best to make Notre Dame still standing. And the story I wanted to share about Notre Dame, because normally we do tours that last between 2 and 3 hours just on Notre Dame. Every single minute detail, the rose window, some of the largest in Europe, these like row of the kings that you can see, maybe the little statues over here, right? 28 kings, one next to another of Judea. We have the arches. Maybe I can look at the pictures here because the arches are a bit hidden. All of these stories, every single detail has a signification, every single statue has a history. But who wanted to build this thing, right? Who wanted to build the Notre Dame? And this is what interests me the most. You know, we can talk about Notre Dame. How long did it take to build Notre Dame? 182 years to build such a church. The person who started would build something that he knew he would never see completed, isn't it? But the thing is that you don't build a church, a cathedral like this in the 1100s for the same reason you build a big building today. It's not meant to last the same amount of time. As a proof, Notre Dame is 800 years old. And it's meant to stand almost forever, isn't it? The person who builds it doesn't build it for himself. Every single detail is pushed to the maximum. Even details that you're not supposed to see are built, are ornate on top of the church, at the back of it, on some spaces that men were never going to see from the bottom of it, are still really cared for, because the church is not built for us, it's built for God. And this is the reason why this church is so special to me. Eventually, the man who had in mind to build a church is called Maurice de Sully. So some of you who speak a bit of French may say, oh, a noble again, right? Throwing his money out of the window to build such a church. Didn't have other things to do, like building sewers, building paved roads, building an hospital. In fact, this man, Maurice de Sully, was not a noble. De Sully is just a kind of a nickname that lasts longer than himself, because He came from Sully-sur-Loire. His father was probably a woodcutter, and his mother actually took over the job when his father died. And he was a smart boy, went to study at the Benedictine Abbey next to where he was living, and came bare feet to Paris. Can you imagine this? The next bishop of one of the most powerful cathedrals in France actually came bare feet to the city. He had to mingle to hide himself in groups of pilgrims when he came to Paris, because France was not as safe as it is today, right? You had Burgundians on one side, you had like the Bretons on the other. But he's coming from the Loire Valley to Paris. Maybe there would be like thieves on the road, so he had to like hide himself in groups of pilgrims to travel. And this is kind of amazing. That man came barefoot to Paris, and he became the bishop of it. When he studied in Paris theology, he actually studied with another pupil of this kingdom, who was rather famous, Louis VII. Louis VII, who is going to become like the prince, who is going to become Louis VII. Maybe you don't know him too much, but he's kind of a failure in terms of royalty in France. That king is the one who was the husband of Aliénor of Aquitaine, tried to go to crusade, failed. His wife managed to divorce him. He lost what we call the Aquitaine and to the English, so it was kind of a mess. His great son is going to do better, Louis IX, Louis the St. Louis, but himself was not that great. But he was great for one thing, listening to the person who is going to advise him for the end of his reign, Suger, and who is like the abbot of Saint Denis, who is going to be the mentor of Maurice de Sully. When Maurice de Sully takes over the bishopry of Notre Dame, he's going to order, well, Notre Dame doesn't exist, but he's going to order a new cathedral. He's going to become the advisor as well of Philippe Auguste, and he's going to push Philippe Auguste to pave the roads, build the sewers, build hospitals. So it's not only Notre Dame, but an entire vision of the city that changed with Notre Dame from a man who came barefoot to Paris. But as we're walking, now we have to skip from a part of the history of France to another. And I wanted to show you something here. Ça va si je prends ça? So I wanted to show you these things. You see the bullet holes on the side over here? I have to be careful because this is the headquarters of the police of Paris. And so these bullet holes and this building behind me, so the Préfecture de Police de Paris, is a really beautiful building built in the 1860s. The bullet holes that we just saw are actually those one made during the liberation of the city of Paris. Maybe some of you have seen this movie, Is Paris Burning? A great movie of the 1960s, filmed in black and white, even though they are Technicolor, for a good reason. Because in France, after the Second World War, we got out traumatized from it, and we forbid any display of the Second World War Nazi regime colors, logos, flags, even in museums for a while, and so even in movies. So some of the lawyers had a good idea to say, well, if I show a swastika on a gray thing, it's not a real one, isn't it? It's not a real German Nazi flag. So they are going to shoot the movie in black and white, and they're going to only use these gray and black flags so they can shoot their movie. And eventually it worked. So when you were looking at the people being like filmed, everything was grayish, and they could shoot their movie. That was so smart. But because they did that, and you should watch the movie for this reason, it's a pretty long movie, 2 hours and 50 minutes. They could insert inside that movie real sequence of the resistance filming of the actual liberation of Paris. So if you watch the movie, be careful, because sometimes the grain of the image goes really bad, and you know this is an original part of the liberation of Paris. Of course, you can watch many more of that. And when we're going to do a tour about the Latin Quarter, I'm going to show you from home and from the archives of the French television and the British television, the shootings, the films of the resistance and the army that was made during the liberation of Paris. So just look behind me. I'm going to show you up. So pretty building. So this is dating from what we call the Osmanization. And just a bit before, what makes Paris pretty, really, just a bit before we continue, let's stop 2 seconds at this market. Maybe you have seen from one of our silent lives, this flower market. This flower market dates from the reign of Napoleon I as an emperor. He was a huge fan of Cologne water, you know, this, because I mean, I guess as a soldier, you need this when you don't have the time to shower on the battlefield. And so it's a lovely, lovely flower market. The construction that you see today is not from the time of Napoleon, though. This is Gustave Eiffel workshop who designed these lovely construction in glass and metal. Look at this. We can go a bit closer so you can really see the patterns of the late 1800s, right? Look at this. Lovely. The funniest thing is to come on a Sunday, actually. When you come on Sundays, you have a birds market. And there is like these little yellow parrots that are like really, really, really hard to get. And it's even illegal now, canaries. And it's illegal to buy them. But some people, they still want to have these lovely little yellow birds. So you come inside and there will be some sellers say, you want a bird? No, come on. But, well, there were some rumors at some point that people could buy them. Now, next building, as we're continuing a little promenade on the Ile de la Cité, is this one. Boom, look at this amazing, lovely chapel. Do you know which chapel is this? Is there any comments, Josephine?
No, go ahead, because actually there is about a 20 seconds delay between our live and the broadcast on Facebook.
Interesting. So when you look at this one, this is what we call the Saint Chapel. It used to be attached to the rest of what was the palace of the city island. That palace, we come back to the Romans. You remember 52 BC, Julius Caesar invades the Gauls, right, with one of his generals called Crassus. And Crassus is going to take over Paris, rather like the city, and he's going to settle his governor's palace where this building is. This has been taken back by the Franks, Clovis, when he comes in, settles in, and this became the palace of the kings of France for the next 800 years when they were coming to Paris. Well, this chapel, though, doesn't date from the Roman. It dates from the 1240s, 1242 to 48, 6-7 years to build it. Compared to the 182 years it took to build Notre Dame, this is rather quick for such a chapel. But what's so special about it? From the side, you feel it's a block of rock, isn't it? But if you go from inside, which we're going to do later on one of our webinars, and get access and film from inside, you will see it's a cage of glass. This is the masterpiece of Gothic architecture. You know, some people ask me, you know, if the French are so great because we're proud of ourselves, quite often, I can take my bad French accent to say I'm so proud of the Saint Chapel. The thing is that we didn't have Renaissance here as fast as the Roman did. There is a reason for it. We didn't have the same type of artists. The technique that we use gives us a bit less freedom when it comes to stained glass windows or when it comes to the frescoes. In Italy, the weather is amazing. So when the weather is so great, so warm, when you are putting frescoes, they're going to last for a good time. But in France, look at this. Today, March, April, May, you can have like this wonderful rain all the time that makes this sub-region, Ile-de-France, so fertile. But on the other hand, no frescoes are able to last. Saltpeter comes to the walls. So we need stained glass windows. And we became masters of this stained glass windows technique. Well, lovely. More than 1,100 stained glass windows, stories of the Bible are kept inside. It's the Bible told in stories. You know, the passage between Gothic, from Roman to Gothic, is really important. Before the Gothic period, almost no one is considered illiterate in a sense. Of course, not everybody can read, maybe a tiny percentage of people can read. But the Bible, when you enter a church in the 8th, the 9th, the 1000s, most of the time is read out loud. When you read the Bible, you are supposed to read it out loud, you know, at the very beginning. And so when people read the Bible, they read it out loud. The concept of reading in your head, and when you go to a monastery is the same, when you go to a church is the same, everywhere is the same. The concept of reading in your head only appeared in the 1100s, really, when people started to stop having this didactic way of talking to one another. And the Gothic period really comes with that period of silence and contemplation. So without dwelling too much into these ideas, Gothic period, amazing time of production of this iconography, where people can start to read without knowing to read letters. But as we continue, what is behind me now? What is that? This is what we call the Conciergerie. And although the top of the building is very recent, second half of the 19th century, the lower part is a Gothic building. And that lower part, when you go, like you can see these wonderful Gothic arches, there is some of the largest Gothic hall of all France inside it. So this was part of the King's Palace, and it was transformed into a jail during the French Revolution, the first French Revolution. This is where Marie Antoinette spent her last days. But I'm going to talk about this in 2 seconds, a bit more. As we continue, we have to talk about this one. Isn't that the most amazing clock you have ever seen? Well, so far, if you continue following us, we're going to take you to these clocks that tell the time and the period of the year where planets are moving around the sun. And it's in wonderful churches all around France, in Strasbourg and other places. And so this clock, only the center part is really original. The rest of it has been restored several times in the 1680s, in the 1850s. And this is a clock offered to Paris by John II, the Good, in the 1350s, where, as a gesture to the Parisians, when he moved far away from the city, when he didn't want to live in the dump that this place became because of the muddy rivers. Up, he moved all the way there. Can you see the tiny flag floating in the wind? It's not that big, isn't it? This is the Louvre, right? This is the best thing I can catch. This is the beginning of the Louvre, that tiny flag. So the kings moved from here up to there, about 1 kilometer away, maximum. And I wanted to show you something else, because we're going to go back to the river Seine, the arteriole of Paris. And this was the level of the street when the building was built. So about 2 meters below where we are. As we continue, so we're at the clock tower just behind us. And now we're going to have Silver Tower, Caesar Tower, and the Good Big Tower. And what happens in these towers? What happens in the Good Big Tower? Any guesses about that? No guesses? Wild guesses?
Birds?
Singing birds? Yeah, I'd love to have singing birds in there. So the Good Big Tower is the last one over here, the oldest one, 14th century. And so what about the Good Big Tower? Eventually, this is the place where we used to torture people. And of course, as you torture them, they are starting to yell. And from the street, it sounds like if it was birds singing, so because of the high pitch. Eventually, there is one specific character I would like to talk about. And this man is called Ravaillac. And so Ravaillac was kept inside this place for about Some people say 1, some people say 3 months, depends on the historian who talks about the story. But basically, Ravaillac tried to murder, and he was not the only one actually, tried to murder Henry IV of France. The Prince Henry III of Navarre, who married the Queen Marguerite of Medici, the daughter of Catherine of Medici. Maybe something history told us is not to marry a woman with a last name called Medici. Eventually, many stories have been told about Catherine of Medici. You will find amazing legends about how many people she murdered. In reality, she didn't do. She was just a woman politician woman in the 1500s, and this was actually the only thing that came out that people couldn't believe such a woman was as powerful. But nevertheless, now we're talking about Henry IV. So Henry IV is the son-in-law of this woman. He is Protestant. He was born Catholic, changed to Protestantism, Catholic, Protestant, Catholic. This is like 4 conversions in life. And when he married Marguerite of Medici, this is a Protestant prince, vassal of the crown of France, who is supposed to marry the princess of the realm of France. And they are supposed to make peace between the Protestant Catholic inside our country. Remember, there were like these never-ending wars between the 2 factions in the land of the 1500s. So how did the wedding go? Well, I wasn't there. I wasn't born. No, the wedding went rather well. The ceremony was not bad. The ceremony was taking place at Notre Dame. And what happened is that the man was at the entrance, didn't want to enter, and the girl was in front of the priest at the altar. So what's next? She didn't want to say yes. And when she said, she had to yell because the man was outside the church. The Protestant doesn't want to go inside the Catholic church. So, well, that was the thing. Do you want to take him as your spouse? Yes! Right. Do you want to take her as your wife? Yes! Can you imagine this? Such a wedding. Well, went well so far, but 2 weeks later, what happened is what we call the Saint Bartholomew massacre. And a lot of Protestants got murdered inside the city of Paris. There are beautiful paintings, beautiful, really amazing paintings telling the stories of the Saint Bartholomew massacre and the responsibility of Catherine of Medici inside the Louvre. And we may talk about it later. But, well, that king, afterwards, when Henry IV came to the power a few years later, was not well come, actually, to the power, and especially in Paris, which was a really Catholic city. So he had to siege Paris in 1598 to take back the right over his crown. And it didn't go well. People were starving. 3 years of siege. They even had to eat the bones of the Cemetery of the Innocent. We may talk on a catacombs tour. Well, Henry IV is there. But when he took the power, he became some of the best king we ever had, as the legend goes, you know, and like people will tell you the legend of the poule au pot, chicken on the pot, that every single Frenchman could go to the king's property to get a chicken for if he was starving for a Sunday lunch. Therefore, chicken and French fries became the most famous dish that we had on Sundays with the families. I just pause on this for 2 seconds. There are lovely little shops. You can buy amazing shoes over here. And here, what I really want to is to show you are these needles shops where Quai des Orfèvres. Next to it, a lot of like jewel makers used to be here in the past, actually. If you want to buy old perfumes, or if you want to buy these lovely little medals everywhere. So, but Henry IV, let's come back to him, became supposedly a really good king. He opened the first squares of Paris, which became later Place des Vosges, Place Dauphine, which I don't enter in because the connection is really bad inside. The buildings dates from the beginning of the 1600s. That's a lovely, lovely place. And that bridge that we're going to cross right now, that bridge, which is called the Pont Neuf. And what about the Pont Neuf? The new bridge, right? Not the 9th bridge, the new one. Up. Let's take a look. Up. That's the entrance of Place Dauphine. A lovely little triangular place. Here we have the statue of Henry IV. And so I started to talk about him because of Ravaillac and the Tour Bonbec, because he was a good king. But I really loved, he didn't care about taking his carriage into the streets of Paris. And after his wife got crowned, so Mary of Medici, he had to marry the cousin of Margaret, long story. And second wedding. After his wife got crowned, he was murdered the next day by a man called Ravaillac, who got inside a carriage and stabbed them many times, from 20 to 50 times, depending on which book you read. And Ravaillac, after that, what happened to Ravaillac? Tortured for a good month, a solid month, I would say. And after that, he was drawn and quartered on the public square of the Hôtel de Ville. And his head was cut off after his limbs, arms, and legs were separated from his body, and some lead was poured onto his head. So amazing destiny. When you don't have Netflix, right? You have to do crazy things. So now, what have we got? When you see a building like this, you see the limestone, the red bricks, the blue tiles on the top of the building, blue, white, red. It's not for the color of France. This is when you have someone who takes care of his budget. The bricks that are on this building, right, they are typical from the beginning of the 1600s. This is also sometimes called the Louis XIII style, the father of Louis XIV, who was the son of Henry IV. And so this is really like the typical of these well-governed states when they don't spend too much money on the limestone. Now we're heading towards the Louvre, and we're going to look at the bouquiniste, something that I really like. At the very beginning of the 1600s, when Henry IV is still alive, when the Pont Neuf is just finished, look at this amazing bridge. Imagine that bridge was built. Oh, can you still see it? That bridge was built in the 1600s, finished in the 1600s, 1607, 1610. Right, how large this was. Good stories happened on that bridge. You had a good show of the people taking out teeth. And so you wouldn't come to get your teeth removed. You wouldn't pay to get your teeth removed. You would pay to watch others having their teeth removed. And the way of doing anesthesia sometimes was a bit rough. In some other people's word, the way to do anesthesia sometimes was just to get a wooden stick, you see, like a good wooden stick, and to hit the back of the head so people will fall asleep quite fast. Don't do that with your kids. I never tried. And then the tooth would be removed. But it would be more interesting for the show to let the people still awake for the teeth to be removed. Well, Henry IV really loved to watch these things happening. The next thing I would like to show you are these boxes that are today a bit sadly closed, but you can still wonder. There's a good 2,000 of these little boxes. And these boxes are keeping the darkest secrets of Paris. No, they are keeping books, second-hand books. Well, a book in English is un livre in French, but the slang for un livre, for a book, is a bouquin. And so this is like normally describing a second-hand book. these people sell these secondhand books from the 1600s. In perspective, in the 1600s, in a street just next to Notre Dame, you would have 120 edition houses, like printing houses, about 30 libraries, public libraries, as an enormous amount of bookshops inside the city of Paris. Renaissance has fully kicked in and everybody wants to have books at home. And it's possible. It's possible to have all these books because of the printing techniques and the paper. Just before we continue, just a little pause, look at this lovely tree over there. Behind, we are just next to the headquarters of the firemen over the Seine River. And then you have a lovely tree at the end of the city island. This is where I had my first kiss. But this is also where the last head of the Knights Templar was buried on a stake. So good memories, all of this. Let's continue. Well, there is a shop about to close. Soon is going to be like a curfew. So at 6 p.m. curfew, it's in less than 30 minutes. So of course they're closing, but look at it. Normally they don't like that we take picture. Oh, Winnicott, pediatrical books, right? From the US. Right, Plateau, Kent. You can find a lot of good old editions when you come to these places. And of course, the people selling books that they printed started to be jealous of it, and there was a revolt in the 1600s. And Henry IV gave right to these secondhand booksellers, and you only have the right to sell it from Notre Dame towards here. You go to the end of the Louvre, right? The Louvre stretches from this point. That's the Louvre, 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 Louvre. I go behind the trees, Louvre, 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 Louvre. That's still the Louvre, right? That's the entire Louvre. About 3 kilometers of facade for this wonderful building. And so you only have the right to sell it from Notre Dame to the last point of the Louvre to have these secondhand books. And that's the rule. But now, of course, things have changed. Revolution has passed by. And we can, of course, sell books wherever we want, secondhand books. Look at this lovely building. Looks a bit like the White House. But this is not the inspiration for the White House. And maybe you have seen George Washington. There is a house. Is it George Washington or Thomas Jefferson? Always mix the both for this house. But well, eventually, this is the Academy of France. This is l'Institut de France, built by Mazarin, an Italian cardinal of France, who was the predecessor of Richelieu and Colbert to the finance of France. He is the one who advised a lot Marie of Medici, and then continued on. And so this was just in front of what we call the Collège of the Nations, where the nation won by the King of France. So you had like, in France was not united before the 1600s. Completely, you know, you had like sub-regions that were rather independent, even though they were vassals of the French king. And so everything was rather united then. And students coming from all these new conquered land would come here and feel part of this big nation that France was starting to be. So what's happening in there? The Académie Française has its walls just behind, and they decide on a lot of rules about the French grammar, the French language, and some rules can be weird, right? About COVID, right? You know, COVID-19 in France, it has to take a genre. It has to take like a feminine or masculine. You have to decide, and it cannot be both, right? It has to be a certain gender, and eventually it became a feminine gender, to the surprise of many people. Like everybody was saying, le COVID, le COVID, le COVID, and a lot of people were saying, Now, the rule is la COVID. And this has been decided by the Academy of France. There is a joke I stole from one of my friends. If he's like listening, he's going to recognize the joke. But that joke goes as for when they decided on the iPod gender. And if kids are listening to us, right, ask your parents what I meant with the joke. Eventually, what do you decide? iPod should be feminine or masculine? Well, a lot of people are going to vote. The polls are open. No. Well, a lot of people say to me it should be feminine, an iPod. No, actually, it's masculine on iPod for 3 reasons. Right? It's simple. It's like a man. It's really simple, right? There is only one button. Then it's easy to turn on, right? One button. And the third thing, the reason why it's like a man, it never lasts long. But that's the thing, right? The Academy has got its secrets, and we cannot really decide, never, why they're going to decide on the next rule. But today things are changing. Most of the members of this Academy used to be men and still are. But more and more women are starting to be elected in the Academy. The people that are elected in the Academy are called the immortals, and they are supposed to stay until the end of their lives. So now more women are inside, I would guess 4 or 5 these days, but more and more women are starting to get in, luckily, for the French language to evolve again. But before we continue, let's have a look at this. Look at this view. Isn't that a beautiful view? That's the tip of the city island. And the tip of the city island really shows you something. It shows you the Louvre that Will is going to talk to us about. We're going to have this presentation next week with him. And it also reminds us of all the invasion we have had, whether it was from the English, from the Vikings. Imagine, right? 8,000 boats, 30,000 men at some points, right? Invading the city of Paris. The long ships are here. And you have the entire city of Paris just stuck on these tiny islands because there were like several of them walled off. And that was it. On a presentation about these, I'm going to show you the engravings, the presentation that have been made of the Viking Siege in Paris. It was dramatic. 10,000 people inside that tiny island trying to survive and defeat more than 30,000 fierceful fighters. Well, of course, the Vikings didn't come with IKEA, Lego, and ABBA, so it was a bit tough for the people here to defend themselves. And as we continue walking, maybe now it's going to be time for us to have a little chat. I know there is 20 minutes delay. Maybe, Josephine, have you had any questions popping up? Or have you any comments that you would like to make?
Yes, there is a 20 seconds delay. So if any of you have questions, please feel free to write it in the chat under Facebook. I do have a question, Ferit. When was the Louvre built?
So the first fortress of the Louvre dates from the 1200. So we are here right now at this point. And this part that you see today, and you can see there is a sign with a double L sign right here. That's the number, what we call the chiffre of Louis XIV, right? The man who built Versailles. But this part of this part didn't exist before him. Rather, it's what's inside. It's called the Cour Carrée. Behind it used to be standing what do we call the medieval Louvre, which was built by a man called Philippe Auguste. And so Philippe Auguste, in 1200, we are doing the construction of Notre Dame. Notre Dame is started to be built. So 1163 for the beginning of Notre Dame. 14 years later, the choir of Notre Dame, the very back of the church of Notre Dame, is finished. And so people can already start to pray in front of Notre Dame or inside it. And this starts to be built about 20 years later. So Notre Dame is like at its beginning. And in terms of character, maybe you don't know Philippe Auguste. There is no movies about Philippe Auguste, but maybe you know Robin Hood, right? Kevin Costner, Sean Connery, rest in peace. Well, we have this king called Richard the Lionheart that comes back at the end of the movie. Richard the Lionheart, at this moment of history, owns a good part of France, right? He's a vassal of the King of France, as well as the King of England. And so when he wants to go to crusade, remember the crusade started in 1093, he has to cross the country of France. It's easier than going through Gibraltar. So the Louvre is built 1200 under the reign of Philippe Auguste to protect the city as the English are crossing the country from time to time to go to crusade with Philippe Auguste. So it's really this moment of history, 1200s, that the first medieval Louvre starts to be built. Then the second phase of the Louvre is the Gothic Loop. So medieval, then Gothic. 1350s, you remember when we were just behind the Conciergerie, when the clock was offered, is when the king, John the Second, the Good, left to come here. And then he was followed by Charles V, the Wise, to come to live in the Louvre and in Vincennes. So the Louvre becomes a stronghold, but also becomes a wonderful palace, because now the walls are a bit further out from the castle. The main difference between a castle and a palace, do you know it? A castle is outside the city wall, the palace is inside. That's the only difference. So, medieval Louvre, Gothic Louvre, and then Renaissance Louvre. The Renaissance Louvre is the one that was started, initiated by Francis I of France. We're in the Renaissance period. We are in the 1520s, to make it simple. And some of the old Gothic Louvre is going to be turned down. And we forgot that they kept the foundation that we're only going to rediscover in the 1980s, when Ian Pei is going to design the pyramids. So Renaissance Louvre starts. We're going to turn down some of the wings of the Gothic one, and we're going to start to rebuild the Renaissance palace. The first pavilion that was a Renaissance built is called the Pavilion Lesko, named after the architect who designed it. And this tiny pavilion is going to become the module, the inspiration for the rest of the castle. And when we can come inside, right now it's closed, but when we can come inside, we're going to describe this wonderful pavilion. And you will be able to see, if you come on spot with us, how much this influenced the rest of the building. We kept evolving, which kept evolving. And with the fourth, and the third, the fourth, and then the Napoleons, Napoleon the First, Napoleon the Third, and Catherine of Medici also built what we call the Palace of the Tuileries, who burnt in 1870 during the Commune of Paris. So the Louvre is really like this, is started in 1200, finished in 1863. And just as we were walking, I wanted to show you this. Boom, Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois, a lovely church. This is the church of the Louvre. And the legend has it that this is where the bells rung to start what we call the Saint Bartholomew Massacre. So any other questions?
Yes. Mark wants to know, when you talked about the Vikings attacking the Parisians, what was the fate of the 10,000 Parisians attacked by the 30,000 Vikings? Was the native population wiped out at that point?
No. So they survived because they were waiting for the King of France was not residing in Paris to come. Charles V was coming to save the Parisians, basically, and he paid a ransom to the Vikings for them to leave the siege for this one in 1852. The thing is that they defended themselves quite well. The abbot of the church called Saint Stephen was actually a pretty good archer, and there was the defender of Paris, which was the father of Charlemagne. Was the beginner of the Capetian line afterwards. Sorry, not the father of Charlemagne, way after, but the head of the Capetian line, who is actually going to come out of the defense of Paris. This man, who was kind of a count of Paris, defended Paris well and survived as long as it was needed for the help of the King of France to come and deliver the city.
Yeah, I think if I may just add to it, the Vikings siege that happened about 8 times. There were 8 major sieges by the Vikings. And because of the final siege, the King of France decided to look for a better solution. Instead of paying ransoms to the Vikings, sometimes who were not satisfied with the ransom and who would still continue to ransack the city, the king decided to propose a marriage union. Actually, the marriage.
And it took place in 911 in Chartres. And so the Viking king at that moment is called Rollo and is going to marry the princess of France, and they're going to get a land. This is where you are going. Which land did they give? The Northman's land, isn't it? This is what you want to say? So the Northman's land. So anybody can guess where the Northman's land is in France today? Any guesses? Wild guesses? Basically, people have been landing on the beaches of that land for the last 1,200 years, whether it was the Vikings or the Allied army in the 1940s. So this is called Normandy. And these beaches that you may have heard, maybe because it's part of your own family history, have been the beaches where the Vikings came from as well.
Yes. So that the region where the Norsemen came is named basically after those men, Norsemen, Normandy. And your own family is also from Normandy, isn't it?
Yeah, my mom is from there, and they are from a little city, a little town, like even not a tiny village called Saint-Michel de la Pierre, so Saint Michael of the Stone, and because there were quarries in there. And we are like about 40 miles away from between 40 miles away from the Mont Saint Michael and 40 miles away from the first D-Day beaches.
And then speaking of the Normandy, Norsemen, and the closeness to England, so maybe you can tell us a little bit about the conflict between the French and the English. Why do they hate each other so much?
We shouldn't hate each other. They speak our language. They eat our food. No. The thing is that 911, there is this man, Rollo, who becomes the Duke of Normandy. And one of these descendants called William the Bastard. He's truly called William the Bastard because he was the bastard of, his dad mingled with one of the lady in waiting of his little castle. So William the Bastard, 1066, cannot stand it. And maybe if we go to Bayeux, we can tell the story that's told on this wonderful tapestry of Bayeux and how the King Harold lost his throne and he had to negotiate with, went on a trip on a boat, lost his throne to William, and William wanted to take it back after a bad negotiation. And so 1066, Battle of Hastings, we have William the Bastard, who is going to become William the Conqueror, and who is going to become the King of England. The thing is that when he becomes the King of England, he came with some of his court and make people of his court the nobles of the land he conquered. And so, of course, it became troublesome with the local population. They were taking the cattle, taking everything they could, resources, having the good life because they were the noble who conquered a new land. So what happens next in terms of language? This is where you have got several words for the same thing, and it depends. There is a word for the animal and a word for the meat, usually like a beef and a cow. Cow is the Anglo-Saxon word, beef is the French word bœuf, and so you have this rivalry because they never really accepted they were part of us and we are part of them. It's a bit like fighting with your brother, your older or younger brother. There's always some rivalry in this, I guess.
So yeah,
we are proud. They're witty.
We have a comment from Laura. She says she really enjoyed all the historical stories about the buildings that you're showing us. And would you like to show us a little bit more of the river view, or?
Yeah, I can go back there. Right now I moved a little bit. towards the side of the Louvre. Maybe you recognize the side of it. We can go back to the river view.
I guess people are all in a hurry to go home because in 10 minutes time it's curfew.
Yeah.
And today both of us were out today, so it's still rather chilly, windy and rainy. Otherwise, normally on the weekends, the people are packed on the banks of the River Seine. I think we didn't get to see too many of them.
Yeah, because of people who are going too much out on the weekends, they are starting to do curfews on weekends as well. So basically, you go to work, you come back home, and that's it. 5 days a week. On the weekends, normally we are supposed maybe to start to stay home, because the Parisians want to hang out and chill and take drinks on the riverside. If you check one of our videos that we made earlier this month, you can see how many people there were on the river banks of Paris. Actually, that was crazy.
Yeah, just about 2 weeks ago, we also did a live streaming silent walking tour, and it's very lovely to see them. But at the same time, we couldn't help wondering, everyone has their masks off and they're drinking, they're sitting next to each other. How safe it is to be mixed with such a big crowd. And the police actually imposed a new law, isn't it? Now it's illegal to be drinking on the banks of the River Seine, and they are parading the area in huge numbers and giving out fines to anyone they find drinking.
And imagine when the Celts that arrived in Paris. I come back to the river view now. This is rather a Celt habit to go on the riverbanks and drink something. The Celts were drinking beer on these riversides, I guess, about 2,000 something years ago, 2,200 years ago.
We have a question from John Ferit asking you, what is your position? So your position right now is?
So what you're looking at right now is the right bank side, so the northern side of Paris, of the Pont Neuf. So you see, you have like the northern side of the Pont Neuf. That little spire is the Saint Chapel. These towers are the Conciergerie. And this island is the tip of the city island district, which also used to be called the Jew Island, l'île aux Juifs. This building right here is the Mint, and this is the French Academy. When you, towards the end, that tiny little black rectangular is Montparnasse Tower. And so I'm really on the right bank of the Seine, facing the Pont Neuf. If that's clear enough.
So you are in between the Pont Neuf and the Pont des Arts, the bridge and the Arts Bridge, in between and on the right bank. You are on the bank of the river of the Louvre. We also have another question from Eileen. Do you know if the sarcophagi or the coffin of Napoleon's dead body in the Dome of the Invalids, has it ever been opened? Is it possible to see the body of Napoleon in the coffin?
So I don't know if it has been open for display. I don't think it has been open for display. It has been necessarily open at some point, because we had the grave of Napoleon in Saint Helene. And by the way, they took also back the tombstone of Napoleon's grave from Saint Helene to Paris. So when you go just behind the Dome of the Invalids, you can see the original grave. It's just basically a plain tombstone, not even with a name. There is not even a name on it. The body is supposed to be inside a sarcophagi, and actually there is not only one sarcophagi, but several of them in different materials. You can look for the details, but like 7 different materials before you have got the body. And normally we don't open the bodies for display. I mean, it was not Mao, it was not Lenin, and we don't want to see the body decomposed. And they were not using these wax techniques that we're using today. Normally it hasn't been open for display for the public, but it's inside, for sure.
Yes, and
Let's,
it's a very interesting story of the death of Napoleon, isn't it? Actually, we know that. Yes, you want to share?
go for it.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the death of Napoleon.
Yes.
So he died because
We don't hear you anymore.
yep, it's working now.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So normally he died because of we think he died because of a stomach cancer, which was genetical. Like in his family, we had a lot of these stomach cancer. The thing is that we think like a lot of things when he was in jail, like in exile on Saint Helena in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The paint, the green paint that was on the wall that the British used for his house was actually containing some poison. Like there was a bit of arsenic in it because the paint was made with that at some point. So because of the green color, people thought, oh, maybe they tried to poison Napoleon, or like this is really like so mean to kill him like this with like little fire, let's say. And in the end, it's just died. We think like really this is the most probable thing, that he died of a stomach cancer. Many other people of his family died with a stomach cancer, and this is also why we think that Napoleon III may not be from the same line as Napoleon I. There is like a lot of probability that the mother of Napoleon didn't like was like going with other men basically than the father of Napoleon. And so this is why like stomach cancer typical from his family. Any other questions?
At the moment, there's no other questions.
Okay, I think we can wrap up. It's almost 6 and I will have to curfew now.
Is it rainy now?
It's starting.
Oh, okay.
So I hope that you enjoyed the tour, and feel free to follow us on Paris and Beyond Tours, whether it's on YouTube or Facebook. And next week is going to be Will, who is going to present his Louvre and some pieces of the Louvre. And in 2 weeks is going to be Josephine. I think you are working on something right now. And
Yes.
I'll let you introduce what you are working on. My next tour is supposed to be about the catacombs of Paris and burial places in the capital over the last 800 years. So continue to follow us and have other content. Today's was a casual walk, but when I'm going to talk about catacombs is going to be more serious. So,
yes, so
I hand over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Ferit. So we are, our plan is to bring you these live walking tours and in-depth discussions on certain topics through the form of webinar every week, Saturday. So we'll alternate the live walking tours with the webinars. And because this month, March, is the Women's History Month, so I'm working on a special tour about the women in Paris, of the great heroines in the history of Paris. So we'll talk about the monuments, but particularly from a lesser told story side, from the women's perspective, or from rather than his history, I will talk about from her story side. So Paris and her story is going to be my webinar in 2 weeks' time. So next week will be Will, our colleague, our guide friend, who will be presenting Louvre and some of its, again, hidden gems. And so we know that 38,000 pieces in the Louvre, 35,000 pieces on exhibit in the Louvre. And he will also share some of his favorites with you. And yes, so thank you so much for coming. And we really, really appreciate your comments. We've had really good comments for both of us today. Mark, thank you very much for your generosity. Anne and Renee and Lynn. And please continue to follow us on Facebook, YouTube. And if there's any topic that you want want to hear, for example, we just had a question about medieval Paris, the medieval Paris. That's very interesting. We can go into the Marais neighborhood, and we definitely will take your advice and your preferences into consideration and organize these tours. So thank you once again for joining us on a Saturday. And I will see you next week, Saturday, 8 p.m. Paris time, for the webinar on the Louvre. Au revoir.